Plato part. But. So, let's talk about collaboration. Why are we all talking about collaboration? Why now? It seems like if you go out and look into the business media, just out in general, collaborate here, collaborate there. What if your teams collaborate? What if we collaborate as companies? Why collaborate now? I wish it was because we felt like we wanted to, like that there was this deep need inside to collaborate. And after all, millennia as humans, as a species, we have collaborated. But I have to believe that businesses are collaborating, and others amongst us who are collaborating, who are typically competitive, are collaborating because of pain. And what I mean by that are wicked problems. And they're called wicked, not because they're evil, though they feel evil sometimes, the results of them. But they're wicked problems because they're difficult to define. And it's typically someone over here and someone over there, and they're defining it differently because they're feeling it differently, and they can't see the whole system. So they're very difficult to define. There's no clear solution. And probably the biggest thing is they sit, if you're having worked in the corporate culture for a while, you've got sales over here, you've got marketing silo over here, R&D is over there, and it sits as a problem that sits above them all, but they can only see it from where they are. So if you're in the nonprofit sector, I deal with workforce development. Well, I deal with homelessness. Well, it turns out that whole problem needs 4 or 5 different people to interact to actually get to a solution. And typically it requires changing behavior. It'd be nice if you could change your behavior. Oh, I have to change mine as well. So that's the problem. Socially complex, and there's all these things where it's a big system, right? So I'm pulling a lever, nothing happens. I go over here and pull another lever. It's 5 times what I expect, because it has these linkages that we just don't expect, which causes this issue of pretty typical chronic policy failure. And I hate to suggest how old I am, but we'll say early 80s, when I was in elementary school, there was this huge conversation around changing education. 2015, huge conversation around changing education. So I think in the 20th century, we got really good at solving complicated problems. Complicated is different than complex. Complicated is figuring out how to put a 787 together and making sure that it flies, hopefully most of the time, over the ocean and gets to where it needs to be. It's complicated because there's many pieces and many systems interacting to come together. It's like a big puzzle. I just have to find all the puzzle pieces. It's complicated, but it can be solved. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we're in the era of complex problems, and it's a very different thing. Complex problems don't have a solution. They continue to evolve. It's not clear, as I said, even what the problem is or how might we solve it. So, for example, I mentioned education. So that's been an ongoing thing in the United States for years. How do I deal with free and reduced lunch kids? How come we have differences in performance? How does race, social economic level, etc., gender play into it's a very complex social problem. Let's take it another level. So you're a business working in a global context. Who would have guessed that oil would be at $47.83 a barrel? Remember, it wasn't too long ago we were paying $4+ for a gallon of gas. So as a business trying to work in a very volatile marketplace, the complexity there of trying to respond to that and be profitable. So it's a complex world we live in. And this picture for me kind of sums up 3 problems. Global poverty. So I spent some time working in West Africa. We've, as a world, dumped about $50 billion or a 40-year period into West Africa. Not much has changed. The scarcity of water, clean water. And then if you want to take it a level higher, it will be the folks who live on $3 a day or less, the 3 billion people, 4 billion people in our world, who suffer the most from climate change. Complex problems. So, the 20th century. Some in the audience may enjoy this. I couldn't resist. 20th century, it's about competition. We as a species, especially in the United States, have done really well with competition. Right? It drives us to find the right solutions. The right solutions emerge. And I'll be honest, I'm a free market, invisible hand kind of guy, right? I believe that the competition really does provide some of the best answers in some contexts. My feeling is that it's become the hammer and every problem is a nail, and we use competition to solve for it. But I believe this next 100 years, of which we're 15 years into, will be about coopetition. And that is an interesting term. So what do I mean by coopetition? There's actually a term created back in 1944, a very smart mathematician called John Nash, game theory, came up with this idea of there are times when you want to cooperate and there are times you want to compete. An example of this is Subaru and Scion. Mechanically, these cars are exactly the same because they made them together. The only thing that's different is the body on the outside and how they chose to market it and to whom they market it to. So here is they cooperated in one part of the value chain and compete in another. And you think, great, Seth, you're talking business here. Same thing applies to nonprofits and government and social sector. There are times to compete, there are times to collaborate. So the trick for us is to become both intellectually but emotionally capable of toggling between being competitive and being collaborative. And you think, well, that sounds pretty easy, but think about it. Competitiveness isn't about trust. It's about getting the most or giving the least. Collaboration is about establishing trust and relationships, and the give and take is free. They're very different things. And so to be able to toggle between the two, I think is actually going to be challenging both intellectually and emotionally for us. It's a skill that we're going to have to build. So I'm going to give you an example that I've been working on at NewNorth, which is trying to get business and education to agree on how to fix education. So on the one hand, you have a group of businessmen, many of them manufacturers, many of them competing not only for talent, but just competing in general. On the other side, you have educators, superintendents, some of them actually competing for students. And yet we've decided that we need to all come together because for the longest time, business has been pointing at education and saying, dude, where's the talent? I've got these gaps. I've got 100 positions. I can't fill them. You're not giving me what I need. You've got education saying, I'm giving you what you need. This is what you told me, I think. And so there's this constant battle between the two. And so how do you manage all that and bring that together? And it takes a little time. You have to establish the trust. You have to understand a shared perspective. But we've gotten to the point where we're having a conversation about K through 12 that's very meaningful and has the opportunity to fix something that we desperately need, both as a community but as a country. So this idea of collaboration, throughout time it has existed, but I believe it's been by default. I don't know if any of you recognize Building 20. This is a place that was built in the early 40s on MIT. And this is where famous physicists, radar, parts of the bomb, were all developed in this building. And after the war, it was thrown up. It's a wood building. It was just meant to last 4 or 5 years. But after the war, MIT would send the scientists, the associate professor, the guys who hadn't quite figured things out, and they all threw them in this huge building, and they started bumping up against each other. And great ideas. It became the magic building where innovation just happened. And they couldn't figure out, well, what's going on here? And it turns out, did a scientific study, that people who collaborate and who are within 10 meters of each other produce more value on a scientific nature than collaborators who are 1 kilometer or more apart. So that's kind of by default. But our situation in the world, I think, is we have to do that by design. But let's talk about collaboration first, because it's kind of like that word innovation. It means everything and it means nothing. Have any of you ever been in a meeting, for-profit, non-profit, where you're sitting there and you agree on the problem, homelessness, food security, whatever it is, but you can't agree on how to fix it. And you just sit and spin. And the light and the energy in the room continues just to be sucked out. And finally, you just stop going to the meetings. That's called black hole collaboration. My favorite is Civil War collaboration. You've been in this meeting, right? I have my view. We don't even agree on the problem, let alone what the solution will be. So we're just going to beat on each other until we get it right. I'm going to win. You're going to lose because I have, my point of view is right. Yeah, clearly not collaboration. So what I'm interested in is productive collaboration. I mean, I think we all are at heart want to be productive. So how do we do that? This is Da Vinci, who was a Renaissance man, right? He had so many skills. He was an artist, he was a scientist, and he brought it all together in his head. I think the problems that we're dealing with complexity are just so grand that no one person can deal with it. So you have to create Renaissance teams. And this is my tribe, if you will, brought together to solve a problem. And this idea is to do it by design is actually the same idea of creating a community or creating a tribe. And you specifically have to do some things to do that. So you have to have a shared experience, a common understanding, the ability to work together, the ability to build. And we're going to talk about that in a second here. But that's the idea of tribing. It's a verb. When you're collaborating, you're tribing. You're actively building a small community around that problem. And we no longer live in one tribe. I used to live in the tribe of Holland, or I live in the tribe of Grand Rapids, or I live in the tribe of Chicago. Now we live in multiple tribes. Facebook tribes, Twitter tribes, all kinds of different things. So this idea of coming together as a tribe and then dispersing isn't that strange. So this is another view of tribing. There's a tribe I worked with in West Africa. I had to get permission to be part of the tribe. And once I was able to open a business. So that idea of tribing actually works. But the key thing is allowing for divergence and convergence. The idea, when I'm working in a tribe, I'm allowed to explore ideas, to deconstruct assumptions or orthodoxies, to question. And then at a point, there are bad ideas, and you need to select them out and kind of come to that main thing. What's a good idea? So perhaps you've had this conversation in a meeting. You're calling a meeting together because there is a problem. Get everyone in the room, 10 people in the room, and half of them or more say, well, I don't think there's even a problem. We're good. I'm not sure why we're having this meeting. But there's that brave soul who says, no, I've got an idea. Well, in West Michigan, that would be a yes, but. In other parts of the country, it'd just be no. But here, we say, yeah, but let me tell you all the reasons why that's not going to work. And I'm doing you a service, right? Thank God I'm here for you to hear me tell you what's, you could have just gone down this path and things would have gotten really bad. But I proceed, right? No, I have got an idea. So I keep pushing it. And the next comment is, Seth, you weren't here, but we tried that. We've done that already. Okay. So you keep proceeding. No, I'm going to push this idea through. And then you get the more strong yes, but it's called, well, that won't work because manufacturing can't do that. Steel doesn't bend that way, whatever the problem is. But you proceed and you get a prototype or something together, and it doesn't work the first time because nothing new works the first time. So what do you hear? We knew it wouldn't work. Come on, that was obvious. But by some miracle, you even get further. You get something that's actually functional. And this is the one that companies do the most. And nonprofits, actually, to be honest with you, is that will cannibalize our market. I'm sorry, we can't launch that. And that's the death of innovation. That's the death of perhaps a solution to a complex problem. So let's turn that around. 10 people get into a room. Yeah, there is a problem. We can do better. People start throwing out ideas. Yeah, and I'm building, right? I like that idea. And what if we did this? And how about, yeah, we're diverging, right? It's not that the ideas are great or right. It's just that we need to expand and think about it a little more. And then it gets to the what ifs. Well, what if we did that? And then there's this idea, well, how might we do that? And then we've got this prototype, and it's like, it didn't work. What are we learning? I learned something. Now let's try it again now that I've learned something. I think other people call that failure. I call that learning. And then you get to something grand. It's like, how are we going to propagate this? How are we going to scale this? So, to me, tribing is about creating wicked solutions. And that is the trick that we need to do as a group, is to get that emotional consciousness, that kind of smarts around how do I collaborate as well as compete. But how do we come up with these wicked solutions? So wicked solutions are basically looking at the system. They're cross-sector, cross-silo. You're trying to design for human behavior, which is tricky. It actually means you have to go and talk to humans. aim for complexity. These problems aren't complex. They're never going to be simple, but can we make them simpler? Because simple answers to complex problems end up being usually more complexity and truly bad answers. And then the last is iterative and dynamic. Everything about this process is agile. So, let's get out there and create some badass wicked solutions. Thank you.